Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf the test is a relatively long daf, but it's divided up neatly. The first half is almost all Agarata, as the Gemara brings the final two statements of Rav Yirmiyah ben Elazar, and the Gemara discusses them. And then the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah and analyzes the halachas in the Mishnah one by one, and then it brings a long list of questions that Abaye had asked Rabbah. So first of all, we have Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar's final two statements in the Gemara's discussion. The first one is going to be about people who are receiving punishments from Hashem who justify what is happening to them, and whether or not everybody agrees to that. And the second one is about where the entrance to Gehenna and Gan Eden can be found in this world. So first of all, Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar says, you see how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is different than other kings in the world. Other kings, if they sentence somebody to death, he needed to put a piece of wood in his mouth so that he will not curse the king as he's being led out to his demise. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, those who are receiving justice from him, first of all, they're silent, as the pasuk says, L'chodumiyah, we are silent to you. Second of all, not only are we silent, but we even praise Hashem, like it says, L'chodumiyah sehila. Not only that, but we actually view it as if we are being brought as a carbon to Hashem, if we accept the Yisur and believe Shalom, like it says later on in the same pasuk, Ulecha Yishulam Neder, it's like we are bringing a promise to you. Now the Gemara says that something that Rav Yeshua ben Levi said also echoes this idea that people who are receiving punishments from Hashem justify it. Rav Yeshua ben Levi explained a drush for the pasuk that said, "Oivrei be'emek habacha mayon yishisu gam birchas yatem meiras." He said as follows: "Oivrei is those who are oiver, those who are violating Hashem's will. Be'emek habacha means that they are being led into the lowest levels of Gehenna. And what are they doing then? They are meiridin demais. They are flowing with tears of regret for what they did. Kamayan shel shisin, like the deep pits under the Mizbeach that go all the way down to the depths of the earth. But at that same time, while all this is happening to them, Gam brachos yate meira, they actually justify HaKadosh Baruch Hu's justice, and they said he's doing correct. What he's deciding is correct. His din is correct. It's correct for him to have Gan Eden for Tzadikim, and correct for him to have Gehenim for Rishayim. So now the Gemara asks on this that it can't be, because Rav Shimon ben Lakish said otherwise. Rav Shimon ben Lakish said that the people who go to Gehenna, actually as they're entering Gehenna, they're still remaining in their rebellion against Hashem. So how could we say that they are really justifying Hashem and agreeing with his mishpat? How does Rish Lakish see that? Because he said, the pasuk says, V'yatzu v'ro b'figrei hanashim hapoishim bi, describes those who are sinners as poishim, still sinners. Not pashu, that they sinned once, they still sin. That means even as they're being led to Gehenna, they're still remaining in their rebellion. So Gemara says, no, it's different. It's not a problem. Rish Lakish, when he said that, was referring to sinners of the Ovdei Kechavim, the idol worshippers. They remain rebellious through the end and through all time. However, Jews, Kal Yisrael, when they sin, when they're finally brought to their fixings, they recognize the truth of the justice that they're being served. And actually you have to say this, because otherwise Rish Lakish is in contradiction with himself, because here he says that they stay in punishment forever, and the rest of the pasuk there says V'isham lo yisichba, their fire never goes out. That implies that they're constantly being tortured by the fire of Gehenna. However, elsewhere Rish Lakish says that the fires of Gehenna do not have a serious effect on Yisrael. So obviously it has to be that he was over there not referring to Yisrael. When he said that, he was referring to Ovdei Kechavim, the idol worshippers. Now, where did Rish Lakish say that the fires of Gehenna don't affect Yisrael? So he says as follows. He says, Kal Chaimer from the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach, which was covered with just a thin layer of gold, the layer as thick as a dinar, yet it had fire burning on it for a very long time, and it did not suffer damage from the fire. So Kal Yisrael, who has mitzvahs, full of mitzvahs, as a rimon is full of pits, as the pasuk says, Kepach harimon rakaseich, which Rish Lakish understands as Reikosech, your most empty ones are full of mitzvahs like a Rimon. Still, they have mitzvahs even though they're empty people relatively, so if they have so many mitzvahs that'll certainly protect them, and better than the gold of the Mizbeach, which protected it, so certainly we'll be able to. So the Gemara says, okay, so we'll accept that, but now we have a problem though, because how does Rish Lakish say that they will not be affected by the fires of Gehenna if we just quoted Rav Yeshua ben Levi, who says that when they go into Gehenna, they are agreeing with Hashem's justice. I thought they're not affected by it. So why are they going there? And what's the whole agreement about? So the Gemara says no, they do have to go in and they are brought in, but after they arrive, Avram Avinu comes and he takes them out. He takes most of them out. The ones that he leaves are the ones who were together physically with a idol worshipping woman, and that is because their arlo, the foreskin, extends, and Avram Avinu can no longer recognize them as a Jew, and therefore he leaves them there. Okay, now the Gemara asks generally on Rish Lakish. You said that when it says hapoishim, you're assuming that is the present tense form. Those who are sinning are still sinning. But hold on a second. But we have a similar tense elsewhere, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're continuing or he's continuing. It says hamoitzi eschem eretz Mitzrayim, he who brings you out of Mitzrayim, and hamala eschem eretz Mitzrayim, he who was lifting you up out of Eretz Mitzrayim. Is Hashem still bringing us out and taking us out? No, it happened way long ago. Obviously, the language of moitzi and mala, just like hapoishim, doesn't have to be present tense, even though it is the present tense form. It can be referring to something which happened in the past. Okay, that's Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar's first statement for this daf. Now the second statement refers to the entrances to Gehenim and Gan Eden. So first of all, he says as follows. He says there are three entrances to Gehenim on this world. One is in the desert, one is in the sea, and one is in Yerushalayim. In the desert, it says Vayerdu Heim V'chol Shalom Chaim Sha'ila. Korach went straight into Gehenim. That was where the land opened up and swallowed him. That was the entrance. The one in the sea is where Yonah Hanavi, when he was in the belly of the fish, said, Mi betan sha'ol shivati, shomate kaili, you heard me from the deeps of the depths. That was referring to Gehenim, the door to Gehenim, which is where he was. And Yerushalayim, because it says, Nu'um Hashem asher orle b'tzion, v'tanal b'Yerushalayim, Hashem has a fire in Tzion and an oven in Yerushalayim. That refers to the fire of Gehenim and the entrance to Gehenim. Okay, so now the Gemara says, hold on a second, there are more entrances. There has to be at least one more. Because we have Rav Marion quoting Rabbi Shua ben Levi, or possibly quoting a Brisa of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. It says that there are two date trees in the valley of Hinoim, which is between Har Abayis and Har Zeisim, and there are smoke coming out from between these two trees. And those are the two trees that's referred to in the Brisa that tells us that these are kosher for lulav. But anyway, that hole with the smoke, that's one of the entrances to Gehenim. So that's a fourth entrance. So no, that was the one of Yerushalayim. That's called the one of Yerushalayim. Okay, on the subject of Gehenim, the Gemara says, Yeshua ben Levi says there are 7 names for Gehenim. Each one has a pasuk, and these are they. There's the entrance. There's the name for Gehenim where it's called Sheol. That comes from the pasuk that says Vayeneni mi beten Sheol. Then there's the one where it is called Avadoin. That comes from the pasuk Haisuper beKaver Chazdecha Abnoscha ba'Avadoin. Then there's the one where it's called Shachas, like it says in the pasuk Ki lo yisaz v'nafshi l'shol lo yisit nechasif chaliro is Shachas. The next one is Bor Sha'oin, and then Titayovein. That comes from the pasuk together Vayaleinu mi Bor Sha'oin mi Titayovein. And the last one is Talmaves. Well, the second last one is Talmaves. That comes from Yosh v'Choshev v'Talmaves Asir Oni u'Barzel. And the seventh one, which is Eretz Tachtis, that doesn't have a pasuk as a source, that's just Gemara that has that. So now the Gemara asks, hold on a second, there are 2 additional names. First of all, Gehenim, that's a name itself. The Gemara says, no, that's not a name, that's a description of the place, that it's in Gei ben Hinoim, it's in the valley of Hinoim. And the reason why it's called Hinoim is because Hinoim is a reference to Chinam, which refers to sins of the flesh. That is why one of the main reasons that people end up in Gehenim in the first place. And the last one is a tofte, like the pasuk says, Ki aruch me'asmal tofte gam hilamel chuchan hemek. So that's referring to Gehenim because it's tofte from the word mafate, to seduce. People get seduced by Averis, and that's why they end up in Gehenim. So again, the Gemara answers that's not a real name, that's just a description, but it's not an actual name. Okay, now on that subject, Rish Lakish says let's talk about what the entrance to Gan Eden is. on this world. Now the Gemara understands that there's only one entrance, and the best place to find it is a place where the fruits are exceptionally sweet and delicious. So Rish Lakish says, if the entrance is in Eretz Yisrael, it's near Beit Sha'an, that's where the fruits are the best. If it's in Arabia, it's near a place called Beis Garam. If it's between the rivers, Machlokes Rishonim which rivers this is referring to, the simplest plat is the Tigris and the Euphrates. Then it's in a place called Dumaskinin. The Gemara finishes off this discussion by saying where you find great fruits. The Gemara says in Bavel, Abai says the best fruits are in the southern side of the river, and Rava says the best fruits are in Harpania. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah, and we're going to analyze a couple of the machlosim which we had in the Mishnah. The Mishnah was about, again, a situation where you have a well, and you want to be able to draw water from out of the well to the area around it. You have to make some kind of a rudimentary structure, so we had special leniencies to allow you to just make 4 L-shaped corner pieces in the corners, building a square around the well. You should be able to carry within those squares, even though you have a large space between the squares, which we usually wouldn't let you do. So we had another machlokes between Rameir and Rabbi Huda as to how those walls have to be built. The Gemara is going to now analyze them one by one. So first of all, the first machlokes was that according to Rabbi Meir, the space between the wall is allowed to be 3 yokes of oxen, which 2 oxen in each yoke. That's a total of 6 cows wide. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's 4 yokes with 2 in each, so it's a total of 8 cows wide. So 6 cows wide or 8 cows wide. So the language, first of all, is problematic. The language was that these cows have to be tied and not untied. The Gemara says, obviously, if they're tied, they're not untied. The Gemara says, you may think when I say tied, I mean like tied, meaning that they're very close together, but not really so close as if they were really tied. Therefore, I'm coming to tell you, no, it has to be actually tied together. They have to be tied mamish right up to each other. That's what we mean. That's how we measure the size. Okay, next the Gemara wants to know what does it mean when it says that they're facing in opposite directions. You have cows in one yoke facing opposite directions. The Gemara says no, it's not that the cows were facing in opposite directions, that the yokes were facing opposite directions, nose to tail. And now the Gemara discusses the actual size. So first of all, the Gemara discusses a slightly different size over here, which is how far is this wall, this imaginary wall that you are envisioning between the corner pieces, how far is that wall allowed to be from the well, the edge of the well itself. So the Gemara says the minimum space you have to have from the edge of the well to that invisible wall has to be at least the head and the majority of the length of the body of the cow, which the Gemara says is 2 amas. So the distance from that wall to the well edge is 2 amas. Next, how wide is a cow? When we're measuring a cow, how wide is it? So we quote the following brisa. It says a cow is estimated according to this, the figure we use is 1 2/3 amas. Now the Gemara says that according to Rabbi Meir, who holds 6 cows, that comes out ki eser, like approximately 10 amas. According to Rabbi Huda, who says 8 cows, it comes out like 13, like 14 amas, meaning approximately 13 or 14 amas. So the Gemara here jumps on this right away. First of all, what do you mean that it's like 10 amas? 6 cows times 1 2/3 amas per cow is exactly 10 amas. Gemara says, you're right, that's exact, but it's an approximation according to Rabbi Yehuda, so therefore we use the term approximation ki eser, so we could say kish loish esrei. Gemara says kish loish esrei, like 13, that sounds like it's slightly less than 13. But it's not less than 13. If you do the math, 8 times 1 2/3 is 13 1/3, slightly more. Gemara says, yeah, because we wanted to say that it's ki eser ki arbase, like 13, like 14, meaning it's between 13 and 14, therefore we use the word ki eser for both of them, but the actual measurement is 13 1/3. Okay, now another machlokes which we had seen in the Mishnah was do you have to have side walls to put in the middle of your imaginary line? Again, remember the visualization here is you have a round well, and then you're building a box around it, a square fenced area, just by putting corner pieces. Now we had seen that according to one opinion, you have to put a sidewall in the middle of that imaginary fence to make the gaps between the corners smaller. So this way you won't have to have a gap all the way from corner to corner, you have a gap only way from corner to wall. So the Gemara now says that Rav Papa says that there isn't a machlokes that you cannot have the walls can't be, the gaps between the walls and the corner pieces can't be less than that. The gaps could be 10 amas. If the gaps are 10 amas or less, there is no machlokes. You don't have to insert anything to make it smaller. And if it's larger than 13 1/3, you don't have to insert anything there either. Now he doesn't use the number 13 1/3. He uses number 14, but he doesn't say these numbers exactly. He expresses it differently. He says it as follows. He says, "What is the diameter of this well?" if the diameter of the well is 8 amos, and you have to have a 2 amos space on either side in order to get to the wall, that means you have to have a total of 12 amos. And remember, each corner piece was made up of a board, of 2 boards that are set at right angles to each other like an L that are 1 amma each. So that's cutting off an amma of the gap. So how big is the gap here? So Rav Papa says if the well has a diameter of 8 amos, then the gap is going to be 10 amos exactly. Why? 8 amos of the well plus another 2 amos on either side for the head and the majority of the body of the cow is a total of 12 amos. Each piece of wall, each corner piece has 1 board on each side and each end that cuts off 1 amma from the gap. So you're down to 10 amos, a 10 amma gap. So if the well is 8 amos, then you have a gap of 10 amos. That or smaller, everybody agrees you don't need to shrink that gap. You don't need to put in wall pieces. However, if the bar was 12 amos, adding another 2 amos on each side that you have to set the corner pieces and the imaginary wall further apart, you get to 16 amos. Then you cut off an amma of each that you have the length of the boards making up the corner pieces. You're down to 14 amos gap. 14 amma gap, everybody agrees, has to be shrunk. And then about that, there's no argument. So the Gemara right away asks, Rav Papa, you're giving me great numbers, but that was all obvious in the Brisa. What do I need this for? The Gemara says that Rav Papa didn't know about the Brisa. He didn't have the Brisa, and therefore he gave these figures. Okay, now the Gemara is going to bring a list of questions that Abaye asked Rabbah, who was his Rebbe and his stepfather, about these halachas of these corner pieces and these wells. And the Gemara is going to show how Rabbah tried to answer almost all of them by bringing a source from a brisa that answered it specifically. And Abaye very often argued and said, no, those brises are not necessarily a proof to what I was asking. Abaye's first question was, according to Rabbi Meir, that you have to add side pieces in the middle of the empty wall space to close the gap if it's too big. What happens if I didn't add side pieces? Instead, I just extended the corner pieces so that they have longer walls and made the gap smaller. Is that okay? So there's 2 versions of Rabbah's answer and Abaye's rejection of it. According to the first one, Rabbah brought a proof from the Mishnah that said that what do you have to do? Bovad sheyarbe bepasin. You have to be marbe bepasin. So he says, what does that mean, marbe bepasin? It means you have to make the corner pieces longer. Isn't that what it means? So Abai said, no, maybe it just means you have to have more boards. You have to have more side pieces in order to close the gap. So Gemara says, well, then it shouldn't say ad sheyarbe bepasin. It should say ad sheyarbe bepasin. You should have more boards. It shouldn't say you should have more of the board. So Abai says, yeah, that's what it means. Ashayarbe pasin, ashayarbe pasin, it means ashayarbe pasin. Now, the flipped version of this exchange is that Rabbah wanted to bring the proof the other way, and Abai rejected it the other way. Rabbah wanted to say that if you look in the Mishnah, it says, Blavad shayarbe pasin, that means to say that you should have more boards. So you see that you're not supposed to extend the corner pieces, you're supposed to just have more boards. And Abaye says, no, maybe it just means that you extend the corner pieces, and that even fits well in the language because it doesn't say sheyarbe pasin, you should have more boards. It says sheyarbe pasin, you should make the boards longer. Okay, Abaye's next question is very similar. The first one was in Rabbi Meir's opinion. The second one is in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that he says you don't have to shrink the gap unless the gap is 13 and a third amos, so larger. How does he want you to shrink the gap if the gap is too big? He doesn't give us any clue. So that's what he asked Rabbah, and Rabbah said, I will prove it to you from a later conversation in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir were discussing how big of an area can you enclose with these corner pieces. And Rabbi Yehuda said, not more than 5,000 amos. 5,000 amos is the maximum you're allowed to enclose with a weak rigged up wall. So they said to him, hold on a second, that halacha is only said in a situation where it's not being used for human needs. It's not being used for housing. But this is a well that is used for human needs, so what's the problem? And he said to them, you're comparing the wrong thing. Human needs is one thing that you need to have a 5,000 amma enclosure or larger. The other thing is you have to have a good wall. And this is not a good wall. A normal good wall you have to have, and this is a wall made out of boards, not a wall made out of wall. So Rabbah says, hold on a second, why is it called a wall made out of boards, not a wall made out of a wall? If you're extending the wall, if you're extending the corner pieces, Instead of adding boards, so you have a very long corner piece, that's a wall. So why is it not called a wall? Obviously, he's saying that you're supposed to just add boards here and there, and you have very large spaces between them, and that's why he's saying it's not a wall. So Abaye is not impressed with this. Abaye says not necessarily. It could be that wall he means to say is that it's not a halachic wall. We're relying on leniencies. We have more gap than wall at the end of the day, and therefore it doesn't count as a halachic wall. We're just letting you get away with it because it's a well, and that's what he's saying. Therefore, it's a weak status wall, and it's not allowed for more than 5,000 amos, square amos. Abaye's third question is, can you have a hill or a slope act as one of these corner pieces? The halacha is that a hill counts as a wall if it slopes steeply enough. That is, if the slope, measuring along the slope on the angle, is 4 amos in a span of rising 10 tfachim. So if you have that, the question is, can it work as a corner piece here? What's the issue? The problem is that it's not corner shaped. The hill has a corner within it. If you were to dig out an area, it could be corner shaped, but it's not actually corner shaped. And it could be that you need the corner pieces to actually be corner shaped, to be L-shaped, in order to mark off and make it visible that you have an enclosure here. So his question was, could you use that or not? So again, Rabbi said it's a brisa. As a matter of fact, it's a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika. Their machlokes is if you have a rock serving as a corner piece, does the rock have to be square or could it be round? What's the argument? Rab explains. If you have a square rock, all you have to do is envision that it's gouged out and shaped like an L, but the sides are already flat. If you have a round rock, not only do you have to envision that it's gouged out, you also have to envision that the sides are flattened. So the machlokes is, can you envision two things, that it's gouged and that it's flattened, or only that it's gouged but not that it's flattened? So this hill is round, so it should depend on that machlokes. Now, Abaye's fourth question and final one for Daf Yud Tes. And again, there's two versions of how this question and answer ran. According to the first version, Abaye asked about a chitzas kanim. That's a wall that's made out of a bunch of only vertical reeds, which are within a sheer lovet of each other. Could that be the corner piece? The question over here is that they're only verticals. There is no horizontal. That's a weakness in the halachos of walls. Does that count or not? So Abaye said, again, we have a brisa. The brisa says, here's what you could use. You could use a tree or a fence or a chitzas kanim. So this chitzas kanim probably refers to your case, so we have a bunch of vertical reeds only. So Abaye says, no, it's not what it's referring to. It's referring to a tree that has a lot of sticks going back and forth, so it's intersecting at various angles. That's what it means. So Rabbi said, how could that be what it means? Elon, tree, was one of the things on the list. Obviously, chitzas kanim is something else. To that, Abaye has a rejoinder. He says, wait a second. So what do you want to say? That it's a type of a fence? But a fence is also in the list. Obviously, you're saying that two types of fences can be listed separately. So I'll tell you, it's a tree, and two types of trees can be listed separately. When it was Elon, it was referring to a different type of tree. There's a second version of this exact conversation, which is exactly flipped. According to this, Abaye was asking about the tree, with the reeds going in many directions. He wanted to know, is that kosher as a corner piece? And on that, Rabbi said, well, we have this brisa, it lists chitzas kanim, and that was probably referring to the tree. So Abaye says, no, maybe it's not referring to a tree. Maybe that chitzas kanim is referring to a fence of vertical sticks, which according to this version is what I was not asking about. The Gemara says, how could it be referring to the fence? Fence is listed explicitly in the brisa. It says fence. So Abaye says, what do you want to say? It's referring to a tree, but it says tree in the brisa also. Obviously, you could list tree twice. You could have two types of trees get separate listings, so then it could also be a type of fence, and two types of fences get separate listings, and it's not an answer to my question, which was about a tree.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.